Dawn Butler MP has been a government minister, a member of the shadow cabinet, and candidate for the deputy leadership of Her Majesty's opposition. But none of this has prevented her being stopped for the suspicious activity of driving while black. In her 10 years as an MP, Dawn has been stopped 3 times by the Met, twice as the driver, and again this Sunday while she was travelling through Hackney in the passenger seat. Dawn has courageously used this event to highlight the institutional racism in Britain's police and, unsurprisingly, faced a pretty gruesome backlash for doing so. And we are delighted to be joined by Dawn Butler tonight.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well. Welcome back to Novara Media. I imagine you've had a busy 24 hours.
It's been a little bit crazy. I can't deny that. Yeah.
We're going to go into all of it in detail as the show goes on. You're also going to be, I'd say I'm delighted to be joined by, but you are going to be delighted that we're all joined by Ash Sarkar. Ash is back from her 2-week hiatus. Are you feeling suitably refreshed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Come back off holiday and there's this world of nonsense and fraff to deal with, which is every day living under racial capitalism.
We are going to be joined at some point by Bastani. And in the second part of the show, when we let Dawn go, me, Ash and Aaron will be talking about David Miliband calling Corbyn a wrecker, the BBC following migrant boats like a safari show, and the Tories who are in line to chair the BBC, to chair the board of the BBC. As ever, you can get in touch with us and tell us your thoughts by tweeting on the hashtag TiskiSour and share the show link. Let's kick off the show, though, by looking at the footage Dawn filmed of her being stopped on Sunday afternoon in Hackney.
We're going out?
Okay, whereabouts?
None of your business. Why do I need to go?
I'm just asking.
Oh, well, no, we're going out.
You're going out?
Yeah, we're having a day out. It's Sunday.
Do you live in London?
I do live in London.
Great.
Why is that relevant? Why is that relevant?
We just want to know where you're off to. I know you're trying to record, to get me to say something silly or whatever. It's not going to happen.
I'm not trying to record.
It's genuine. I know. It's a genuine vehicle stop. That's all it is.
I know, but I'm just asking, why is it relevant if I live in London?
No, because we're just asking what you're up to in the area. That's all. We're doing proactive patrols in Hackney Borough, combating gang and knife crime, things like that. We obviously want to know that people are driving legitimately as well.
So I tapped in the registration, it's come up same make, model, colour of the vehicle, and it says something about North Yorkshire. Run it through again, that North Yorkshire's
so
not there anymore.
How could that have happened that the system came up wrong the first time?
I don't know. So like I said, I do apologise.
I am concerned about the reason for the stop. So that's what I'm concerned about. So because you know, we should be able to drive wherever we want in London because you're not just contained to the area where you live. No, of course. So that is my concern. So, like, if you're just profiling people who are driving outside their area, I think that's a ridiculous reason to stop. If you're profiling people who are driving a certain type of car, that's an inappropriate reason to stop. And if you're profiling people because of the colour of their skin, that's an inappropriate reason to stop people. Right. Okay. So now the thing is this: I've already explained. I've had no reason. I've got no concern with how the officer stopped me. Very polite. What I'm questioning is the reason for the stop.
So I think our audience will agree you handled that exceptionally well, Dawn. Can you talk us through sort of exactly what happened from your perspective, but also why, since that event, you've said it's an example of the Metropolitan Police being institutionally racist or systematically racist?
So I'm still quite perplexed as to why we were stopped in the first place. Like, I don't know why the officer felt the need to put our number plates into their system. I don't understand that. And all I can do is talk through the facts, and the facts were I was there. My male friend, who was black, was driving. He's got a fairly nice car. And we were driving through Hackney slowly because the lights were changing and we were just basically cruising. The sun was out, it was nice. And, you know, we get stopped. And so I'm still perplexed as to why we got stopped in the first place. And I don't know what's wrong with North Yorkshire. You know, even if the car was registered in North Yorkshire, why would that ring alarm bells? I don't understand it. So there's a big issue around that. And the only thing I can come up with is that, you know, we were racially profiled. And they said, oh, there's 2 black people, you know, in a car. driving through Hackney, let's stop them. And if that's the case, then we just have to identify and question how the police are policing, because there's so many people been working on this for so many years. 85% of all of the stops that happen, only 15% result in action. 85% are no further action necessary. That means that the police are using a system that has a 15% success rate. I don't understand any other workplace that was using a system that had 15% success rate. They would scrap that system and use a system that was more effective. And so that is the issue here. That is the big issue that needs to be contended with and needs to be dealt with.
I mean, it does seem like their explanation did not add up, because, I mean, it was interesting that when he started talking to you, when he opened the window, he started talking about drugs and violent crime, etc. And then they say they put in your number plate well, they haven't explained why they put in the number plate. They put in the number plate. They said it was a Yorkshire vehicle. They haven't explained why it being a Yorkshire vehicle would mean they have to stop you. So there's two unanswered questions, which is, why did you type in the number plate? And why, once you typed in the number plate, did you feel like it being from Yorkshire was a good enough reason to stop it? And yeah, they haven't given any explanation.
Not at all. And, you know, the younger police officer who was asking me if I'm from London, where I'm going, I felt like I was being interrogated for coming out of my house on a sunny Sunday afternoon. And when you think about it, right, we're in lockdown. We're coming out of lockdown. Lots of people are going to be having staycations. People are going to be traveling far and wide. So if you're saying if you travel more than 20 miles outside of your home, you're going to get stopped, then people need to know that. You need to know what are the circumstances that makes you suspicious so that you can maybe mitigate against those circumstances. And I just think it's important that we have this understanding, this conversation, this dialogue. And I am going to be meeting the Met Police, hopefully by the end of the week. Not just with me, because it's not just about me, but with other people that have been working on this for many, many years. Because ultimately, we need to have a system that works. We need to have a police service that works. There's no point in you over-policing one group of people and creating animosity. It builds no confidence in the system. And in order for it to work, we need to have confidence in the system.
Let's talk about a bit of the backlash you've received. So some of this has been from kind of the far right on Twitter, kind of a bunch of conspiracy theories, like you flipped the video to make it look like you're in the driver's seat and actually it was a white driver, which would undermine your story. And that the hashtag sack Dawn Butler, because you got stopped for no reason. I don't know what the connection is there. But I also want to go to, I suppose, the highbrow end of the backlash, which I think is best represented by Tim Montgomery. So Montgomery is a Conservative commentator who until very recently was an advisor to Boris Johnson in Downing Street. And he was advising him specifically on issues of social justice. Let's get up his tweet today. Britain is one of the kindest, least racist societies in the world. But the way Labour politicians like Dawn Butler rush to think the worst of our institutions, like the police, explains why their red wall seats tumbled so spectacularly to Boris Johnson and why they'll stay blue. How do you respond to that particular criticism, the idea that you're seeing the worst of our police, you don't accept that they're in a difficult situation when they're trying to judge who to stop and who not to stop, and also that Britain is one of the least racist societies in the world. So, you know, I suppose the implication is everyone should stop complaining.
So to quote Dave, least racist is still racist. So I don't really take that as a very good explanation, number one. Number two, all I essentially did on Sunday was share 8 minutes of my life. That's what I did. So much happens to me every single day, every single week. I don't share every incident that happens in my life or day. The fact that it shocked people is one thing. I mean, some of these far right people, my goodness, do they have an imagination? You know, somebody said to me today, because I haven't read it, but somebody said to me today, apparently I was driving around Hackney for 4 hours waiting, begging to be stopped. Somebody else said apparently that Jeremy Corbyn was driving the car. I don't even know if he drives. But I mean, they've got one hell of an imagination. And my friend, right, who is black, I mean, he's not mixed heritage, he's black. What is that? And in fact, when you think about it, if it was a white guy driving a car from North Yorkshire, shouldn't that lead to less of a reason, maybe, possibly, for me to be stopped? You know, all of the excuses that people are giving to try and explain the situation away has made me think even more deeply, oh my God, you know, there's so much racism that exists. There's so much racism that you feel compelled to come up with these conspiracy theories to explain it away. And that's all it's done. So, you know, it's made me think, wow, I didn't expect that. And it is actually deeper than I imagined it was.
I'm going to bring in Ash in one moment, but first of all, I want to get your take on Labour's somewhat flaccid response. I'm going to talk our audience through it first. So, yeah, there wasn't a response for a while from Keir Starmer. We can get a quote from a Labour List article from 11:20 this morning. So it says, Labour List has requested comment from the Labour Party and from Keir Starmer's office, but has been referred back to Butler by the party and not received a response from the leadership. So many hours after the event, it had already gone massively viral on Twitter. Hashtag Sack Dawn Butler was already going viral on Twitter. But Keir Starmer nor the Labour Party wanted to give any comment whatsoever. They just said, just speak to Dawn Butler directly. Not much solidarity being shown there. In fact, Boris Johnson gave a comment before Starmer or the Labour press team. So it's not an amazing comment, but at least it's a comment. He says police should treat people with fairness and equality after MP Dawn Butler racially profiled. Now, Starmer did end up responding, not until this afternoon. We can look at those tweets now. I reached out yesterday to Dawn Butler Brent to discuss the incidents she reported and to offer our support. All allegations of racial profiling must be taken extremely seriously by the Metropolitan Police. Doesn't seem like he was spending too long constructing that tweet. It's grammatically incorrect. But anyway, that's not really the most important part. Let's go to the next tweet, the reply to that, or the second in the thread. It is imperative that the black community have trust and confidence in our police. The abuse Dawn has received over social media is wrong and must be condemned. This is all pretty weak, I'd say. I mean, that initial tweet to me doesn't really say much at all. Allegations of racial profiling. He's not weighing in on the fact that an MP, a black MP, has been stopped 3 times in 10 years. And I doubt, I mean, I can't confirm this, but I doubt he can find a white MP who can say the same. Do you feel like you've been let down by the party here?
So Keir had reached out to me very early on. He sent me a text. I mean, I didn't actually have time to respond, you know, in any depth to him. So he did reach out. So I've been thinking about this, and do you know the weirdest thing is I didn't actually expect, I wasn't seeking any support in that way. And maybe I should have been seeking some support. So I wasn't actually seeking some support. And, you know, people have spoken to me about it. And I thought, oh, okay, that is something that I need to look at and review. But, you know, Keir has commented. I think that the party has a lot to learn on anti-black racism. And they've got a long way to go. And that's a journey that I'm willing to take the party on.
So, I mean, to clarify, you don't think they take it seriously enough right now, anti-black racism?
I think that there is a journey and a lot to learn. I think that Black Lives Matter has raised so many issues. And if we are going to tackle structural racism in society, we need to have those conversations. Some of those conversations will be difficult and some of them will be uncomfortable. But in order for us to see long-lasting and systemic change, then we need to have those conversations. And we need to have that conversations in all levels of every single organisation that exists.
We're going to bring in Ash now. I'm sure she's going to have loads to say on all of this, especially the backlash. But you live through that for so much of your life, as I suppose I'm sad to know about.
Well, hi Dawn, a long-time listener, first-time caller. So I want to ask you about Keir Starmer specifically. Now, I'm under no illusions. I don't expect him to be Angela Davis when it comes to criticisms of the criminal justice system. He's a former DPP after all. But it seems to me that when it comes to issues of anti-black racism and the state, he's not able to confidently speak from a position of empathy and understanding. So his vim came when he was dismissing defunding the police as a nonsense. He, accidentally called Black Lives Matter a moment rather than a movement. And then you've got this statement, which has been outflanked in terms of racial literacy by Boris Johnson. And so the thing that I want to ask you is, do you think that this is a blind spot, a thing which Keir has got to learn about and you can take him on that journey? Or is it an electoral calibration? He's scared of spooking those voters who thought that Jeremy Corbyn was weak on law and order. And so he doesn't want to go too hard on criticising institutional racism.
So I think that you can be strong on law and order in regards to, I want a very good police force. I want a police force that works. I appreciate, the work that police officers do. What I don't want is a police force that after 20 years of the Macpherson report identifying them with institutional racism, that nothing much changes. What I don't want is a commissioner that, doesn't like the fact that the term is still in use, even though it's still very relevant to the force that she leads, and all of that needs to change. I think that there needs to be an education and a learning, and maybe I hadn't even realised the extent of that learning that needs to happen. And the leaked report, the Labour Party's leaked report, cut very deep, and for me, and actually made me realise, oh my goodness, there is a lot that needs to be done here around anti-Black racism. And so it's something that the party has to deal with. And it's something that, I, for one, will be ensuring that the party gets right. And we're not getting it right at the moment. And it has to be.
Do you think that the leadership will ever be able to speak with that kind of conviction on these issues? Because it seems to me that, Keir Starmer can be a very convincing public speaker. We've all seen him do it. And then suddenly he turns into, Grey Norman from HR when it's time to stand in solidarity with Black and brown communities. Do you think he's ever going to get to that point?
Well, I don't think he has that much. I don't think he's that, what's the word I'm looking for? Energetic and involved in lots of conversations. I don't think that's his actual style. But he will have to get it. And in regards to the Red Wall area, stuff like that, if you're saying that everybody in the area is racist, I think that's very much an insult. What's his name, who sent that tweet out. I think that's very much an insult for people in the Red Wall area. I went there during the campaign and actually they're very warm and friendly. So I don't think we should label them that way. But, Keir and Angela will have to get it right. I mean, they must and have to get it right. It's imperative. We are the Labour Party that was built, on equality and social justice, and to think that you can throw all of that away because you want to appease to a certain group of people is an insult. And actually I couldn't personally belong to a party that felt that. So I don't believe and hope that is not the case.
Aaron, quickly before we let you go, Dawn. We got Aaron in?
I'm here, Michael. There was a logging in noise. It wasn't me.
You've been here the whole time.
I've been here the whole time.
What did you make about the whole Ferrari? Have you been stopped, actually? Have you been stopped and searched? Because I haven't.
I've been stopped. It depends. What do you mean by stop and search? I've been stripped searched by the police.
I've only been stopped at a protest. I've never been stopped sort of randomly in the street. It was a very interesting tweet thread by Ali Milani today, actually, where he was saying, reply if you have been stopped by the police. And there was just, hundreds of white people basically saying no. Or maybe once at a protest, or once when I was doing XYZ thing. And then anyone who wasn't white was saying, yes, four times, 5 times, 5 times in a week once. It's the kind of thing where even though you have Darren Grimes saying, oh, well, if I got stopped, I'd be perfectly happy about it and I'd answer the question politely. But he hasn't been stopped. That's the whole point.
Yeah. I've been stop and searched once, and actually it was a very radicalizing moment for me because it completely changed my relationship to the police. I just thought they were so belligerent, so irrational, bullying, hectoring, aggressive, and it was so unnecessary. I was just like, wow. And it was actually, again, I talk about it a lot, and I'm sure there are many police forces which have major problems, and racism is a problem throughout the UK, and it's not just limited to the Metropolitan Police Service. But I have to admit, I only first engaged with it after I'd moved to London, and it was a shock. It was a real sort of blinkers off eyes moment. But in terms of in terms of this conversation, I just want to sort of ask Dawn with regards to the Tim Montgomery point, I guess, and the whole red wall kind of take. I mean, do you think that that's something that many of your colleagues in the Parliamentary Labour Party might also agree with? Because that then represents a problem, doesn't it? If you want the Labour Party to begin to grapple with anti-black racism and take it seriously and address this as an organisation and change attitudes internally and so on. But if they agree with his diagnosis of the problem, we shouldn't talk about racism so much because it means we won't win back the red wall. I mean, that's going to be something of a hindrance, isn't it?
Well, I hope that people in the party don't think that way. I mean, as I said, I think it's insulting to say that everybody in the red wall are racist, but to think that we shouldn't talk about race or racism because it might put people off, then what is the point in us being here? There are so many people. There are more people that want a just society. There are more people that don't like discrimination than there are those who discriminate. And I think we should have more faith in people. And what we have to do is weed out, the ones who are racist, weed out the institutions that have racism hardwired into it. We have to undo all of that, and it's going to take an effort, not just by black people. It's going to take an effort by white people, by everybody around. It's going to take an effort. It can't just be one group of people alone, and that's why the Black Lives Matter movement, that's why seeing people on the streets of all different colours, races and creeds and class was so powerful, because it's saying, this is the time that we're living in where we don't want any of that throwback racism to exist, and we're going to change it from now. And I think that's absolutely fundamental and vital. And, we can win back people who have left Labour with good policies and good foundations and holding the government to account. This government is getting away with horrendous things. This government is getting away with issuing procurement contracts to pest control companies for, PPE. This government is getting away with not implementing what the scientists have said in order to help us get through this pandemic. Let's hold the government to account. Let's be a strong opposition. That is how we win people back, not pandering to racists. That is a bad form and not something that I can be a part of.
Dawn Butler, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Solidarity to you from all of us at Novara Media, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to go on to our next story in one moment. First of all, we've got 2,000 people watching. Let's get that as close to 3,000 as we can tonight. It is a heat wave tonight, but I think the sun has gone down. Yes, it has. So there's no excuse to not be watching Tisky Sour live. The BBC is seeking a new chair of its governing board, and the Sunday Times this weekend reported some high-profile names the government are considering for the job. They include ex-Tory Culture Minister Nicky Morgan, ex-Tory Home Secretary Amber Rudd, and chairman of the right-wing Spectator magazine, Andrew Neil. Somewhat surprisingly, these candidates were all presented by the Sunday Times as being concessions to the BBC. Boris Johnson, I suppose, reaching out a hand and saying he's not going to put people in place who are as anti-BBC as they might have expected. Let's look at how they have framed this particular story. So it says, Boris Johnson is seeking to rebuild bridges with the BBC by appointing as its new chairman a prominent figure from the right who does not want to blow up the national broadcaster. Now, not wanting to blow up an organisation seems like a fairly low bar to pass, to be able to run it. But I suppose that's kind of the Tory approach to public services. We can get a bit more from that piece. Now, Johnson has ruled out appointing a berserker to the role. John Whittingdale, accused by some of being a hammer of the corporation when he chaired Parliament's Cultural Select Committee, will remain a culture minister. So we're not going to get a berserker. But Baroness Morgan, so she is in contention, a former culture secretary, is an early front-runner for the role since she led calls for change at the BBC, but is seen as an emollient character. Neil, a former editor of the Sunday Times who criticised Johnson during the general election for dodging an interview, is seen as robust and independent-minded, but as someone who has a long association with the BBC. Johnson and Rudd remain friendly despite her resignation from the cabinet last year and Johnson's decision to strip her of the Tory whip. Now, all of those qualifications for the characters who are, set to be put forward for that job. Obviously, this is speculation from sources, of course. I doubt it's pure speculation, but none of this is confirmed. None of them really seem like the kind of things that would qualify someone for a top job. So for Nicky Morgan, the argument seems to be she shares Boris Johnson's politics. She wants to reform the BBC, probably in a way of sort of stripping back its independence. But she's also quite nice. Andrew Neil shares right-wing politics, but is also seen as independent-minded. And Amber Rudd, all it seems to suggest is her qualifications are that she's on friendly terms with Boris Johnson. None of this inspires me with confidence. Now, it's not rare as well. So you might think, this is the chair. How important is that position? It is an important position. It's the board who elect the Director General or appoint the Director General. And the Director General who's been appointed, who is going to take over next month, is also himself a Conservative. So next month, Nick Davey will take over in the top job at the BBC. So that's basically being editor-in-chief for the whole organisation. And Davey is a former deputy chairman of the Hammersmith and Fulham Conservative Party and unsuccessfully ran for a council seat in 1993. So we've got the chair for the BBC could be an ex-Tory cabinet member. The Director General of the BBC could be an ex-Tory chair of a Conservative association, an ex-council candidate. It's not looking particularly impartial at this point in time. Aaron, I'm going to go to you. Should we be shocked at the closeness of top BBC appointees to the Conservative Party, or is this all par for the course?
Yeah, I don't think BBC is an independent organisation. I think it's so subject to political pressure from the government of the day. I just think it's a ridiculous thing to claim. I think clearly it has some good moments, some not so good moments, but it often crosses the line from public service broadcaster to state broadcaster. I think that's inarguable. What I would say is with the claim of Andrew Neil potentially getting that job, there will be a profound conflict of interest because, of course, as I understand it, he's the chair of the Spectator. He has a significant involvement in the Spectator magazine. If he was to have that position, then journalists at the Spectator were to be playing a more prominent role in the BBC's political affairs output, having arguably more influence over its editorial positions, etc. I think that's really significant grounds, sufficient grounds for him not to have that role. For a former MP to have it, I think is clearly absurd. It has to be a media person. I mean, wow, let's look at Andrew Neil's CV, by the way. Before the BBC, he worked at The Economist. His first, Andrew Neil, not many people know this, Andrew Neil's first job was at the Conservative Research Department. His very first job. And now he's going to be apparently a sort of a concession as a moderate candidate to have this very senior authoritative role at the BBC. His second job was at The Economist magazine. Towards the end of the 70s, early 1980s, he often said that he was, a radical on the right. He was to the right of Margaret Thatcher. This is what he would say. He's written this down in black and white in his autobiography. He then, of course, went to work at the Sunday Times. He was a very young man, editor at the Sunday Times when Rupert Murdoch bought the paper. He was there for the best part of a decade. He then proceeded to help start Sky News, briefly went to work for Fox News in the United States, and now he's being touted as a candidate for the BBC. So somebody who's got a record of Conservative Research Department, Economist, Sunday Times, Rupert Murdoch's golden boy, Fox News. Now this is seen as kind of like an establishment concessionary person that can have this role at the BBC. I mean, that really does betray the extent of the rightward drift in Britain's political culture, but also how there's been really shocking in many ways institutional capture of some of the most important public roles in this country by actually what is a very small clique of people on the right, both in politics and in the media.
I mean, one thing I find incredible is that even though you've got, the BBC, the Director General who's been appointed is an ex-Conservative candidate to be a Conservative councillor, and now the talk of who's going to become the chair, we've got 2 ex-Tory cabinet members. You've still got right-wingers who are so obsessed with their own victim complex that they think that left-wingers control all of our cultural industries. I want to go to a particularly, I suppose, overboard quote by Ed West in Conservative Home, which came out at the end of last week. So he wrote, "There won't be a backlash because, and this was my argument, the left now controls almost every institution in Britain. It doesn't matter who's in government because the generation growing up, including my children, will be bombarded with progressive messages and signals, all equating left-wing social ideas with morality and conservatism with low status, bigotry and failure." Ash, how did we get to a point where you've got out and out Tories, Tory politicians who are set to become chair of the BBC. You've got a director general who is a Tory politician or attempted to be a Tory politician, and you've still got right wingers crying that the left control all of our cultural institutions. What the hell is going on here?
Well, I think you've got multiple different aspects to it. One is that the Tory party don't want to destroy the BBC. They want to completely eradicate its independence, make it a fully political creature, which becomes an extension of the Tory party propaganda machine. That's what they really want to do. And they want to do it in as informal a way as possible. So the BBC still has something of that prestige, that international reputation, but that's what they want from it. At the same time, right-wingers more generally are gripped by a panic that they cannot and do not know how to wield informal cultural power in the way that progressives can. The kind of generational divide that we're seeing in voting behavior and ideology, really is unprecedented in lots of ways. As Owen likes to say again and again, the majority of young people in the 1980s voted for Margaret Thatcher. That is not a similar pattern that we're seeing in terms of the voters who delivered Boris Johnson his majority just in 2019. So you've got a problem. You've got an electorate that's really reliable but dying off, and you've got young people who've got no economic stake in society as it is, and they have a profoundly different set of social and cultural values. And in the face of that panic, I think it's not all that surprising that the right are now trying to eliminate the left from any sort of institutional home that it's been able to find, whether that's in the academy, whether that's in state schools, and of course in media as well. The other thing is, I think that you've got a bastardization of identity politics, and that's a big part of what cancel culture is all about. It's all about being able to appropriate the language of minoritarian grievance for the interests of power and wealth, and that's why journalists are so obsessed with cancel culture. It's why anytime you criticize a journalist in fairly polite terms, in a way that used to be called the marketplace of ideas, by the way, the cry goes up, "I'm being cancelled." And Andrew Neil, who I think is a very good interviewer, he does these live vivisections. He's very effective at what he does. The minute you get someone going on his show and saying, well, how can you claim to be an impartial journalist when you're, the chairman of The Spectator, which has got a very right-wing editorial outlook, he goes berserk. He shuts down the conversation, and a while later he claims this as an attempted cancelling, which isn't yet on the statute books as a criminal offence, but we'll get there. And so I think it's about playing this game, and it's a game which is driven, I think, primarily by fear, because you've got your baby boomers in geographically inconvenient places delivering you majorities, probably will do in 2024 as well, but 2029, what about 2034? Going forward, how are you going to have a conservative electorate reproducing itself without your hands on the cultural levers? The problem is that the demographics that you want to capture aren't really watching the BBC.
I agree with Ash. In the long term, for the next 20, 30 years, they have, problems. But between redrawing constituency boundaries, between potentially Scotland leaving the Union, it is possible for the Conservative Party, even with, we saw this incredible poll for Ipsos Mori last week, didn't we? Where I think Labour were behind 9 nationally, but amongst the under 65s, they were 4 ahead, which is just unbelievable. Tells you two things. Firstly, there are lots of over 65s. There are lots of them. It's not a small demographic, and they're just far more likely to vote. And I think Ash is right to say, well, look, that will have a political overhead for the Conservatives in 20, 30 years. But between redrawing boundaries, between voter disenfranchisement, which the American right has become expert at over the last 30, 40 years, that could come. That's not really been applied here yet, right? We're beginning to see that debate with voter ID, but that could be a major variable too. So it is perfectly possible for political minorities to capture the apparatus of the state and still govern in the name of majoritarianism. We've seen that with the Republican Party in the last presidential election. I think we arguably saw it in 2000. It's not talked about enough. And the fact that George W. Bush maybe didn't actually win that election, maybe he didn't actually win Florida. And if he did, it was because of voter disenfranchisement in certain counties of Latino and African-American voters. So I'm optimistic in the longer term, and I think that's why they're doing this. But I also, I don't think we should have necessarily, I don't think Ash has this for 1 second, but I've seen it elsewhere, a sort of deterministic view of we have the electorate of tomorrow. You know, I don't think that's necessarily the case.
I agree. I just say that to myself so I can sleep at night.
We're going to go to a couple of comments. Mark Lungley tweets on the hashtag Tiski Sour. I gave up on the BBC a long time ago. Get much of my news from yourselves at Novara and Double Down News. Good comrades at Double Down News. Great viral videos. I missed this one area. Apologies. John Heimlich with a £5 super chat. Solidarity to Dawn. Your party has let you down, but we see you and we love you. Keep the faith with a heart. Wholeheartedly agree. Rich Williamson with £2. Who's a regular viewer and regular donor. It's too hot. I sit on the fence on that question. And Ed Lee with £5 super chat, no pass around. We're going to go to our next story. Since David Miliband was defeated by his brother in Labour's 2010 leadership election, he had been held up by the party's Blairites as the figurehead of what could have been with a party not to have gone down the silly route of actually standing for something. Though now in New York on a $1 million salary as head of the International Rescue Committee, Miliband frequently opines on British politics, and he spoke to Matt Chorley on Times Radio this morning.
Obviously, one of the things that Keir Starmer is dealing with at the moment is the fight that the Labour Party still seems to be having about an election that happened 3 years ago, and this idea that Jeremy Corbyn would have won the 2017 election if only it weren't for people within his party. Do you believe that's right?
This is a pure wrecking tactic from Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbynites. Denial after 4 successive defeats is a route to more defeats. And we learnt that after 1992. We got out of denial and we won in 97. And actually, we won 3 elections on the trot. And if we don't really understand that when people got a look at Labour in 2017, we couldn't beat the worst Tory campaign in history, 750,000 votes we were behind. And then when people got the full measure of Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, he led us to the worst election defeat since the 1930s. So it's a wrecking tactic, and I hope people understand it for what it is.
So, I mean, calling Corbyn a wrecker just for calling out wrecking is a little bit rich. But more than that, I think this whole question, which has been debated a lot this weekend, is kind of irrelevant. Would Corbyn have won in 2017 if it weren't for the well-documented attitudes within Labour Party HQ of people who weren't particularly keen for him to become Prime Minister? We never will know, sadly. But what we do know is that right-wing staff were actively working against the left-wing Labour leadership. As I say, their reaction to the results prove that. Their reaction to the results, which is to be incredibly disappointed that Jeremy Corbyn had a chance of becoming Prime Minister, right? It's not a conspiracy theory. So the fact that David Miliband is trying to bury this history, this well-documented history, is ridiculous. But more important than that, what 2017 showed was that a left-wing economic program can get you to 40% in the polls. And that's exactly the kind of thing that David Miliband and everyone who shares his politics, you know, a key tenet of their politics was you cannot offer anything which challenges the establishment. You cannot offer a radical transformation of the present situation and go anywhere. They were all predicting Corbyn would get 28%, whatever. They've been proved wrong. And what they now want to do is just blend that result from 2017 into this general sort of flabby history of defeat and keep it so that the only example of Labour having a successful election campaign is under Tony Blair, where you ended up having foreign secretaries like David Miliband who end up defending extraordinary rendition after backing illegal wars. I mean, if all he is trying to do is persuade us that there is no other option than warmongering neocons just with a red rosette, then I suppose good luck to him. What did you make of that particular intervention, Ash?
God, he's one of those people who, you know, blew his own horn about leaving politics and can't resist jabbing his oar in. I'm just like, stay on, mate. But in terms of his intervention, what David Miliband and his ilk would like nothing more would be for the left to confine its political ambitions to Corbyn's success in 2017. They want us to relitigate 2017 over and over and over. And what they don't want us to do is to push the conversation forward, which is saying, well, what happens if we get another left-winger as Labour Party leader? What happens next time, you know, they even get on the ballot? What kind of wrecking operation might we see? What kind of accountability is owed to the members for the potential misuse of their subs and their donations? These are pretty serious questions for how you run a party and what a membership can expect from a party bureaucracy. But the framing of it, which is, you know, this is the last gasp of Corbyn and Corbynites in denial, it's, I think, to try and, you know, keep us trapped in an argument which makes us look irrelevant, cranky and embittered, and not pushing forward onto the much more salient issues. Now, that's not to say that the anger about the lost opportunity of 2017 isn't legitimate, because of course it is. It's also not to say that the anger regarding how Jeremy Corbyn was treated by much of his own party, who set out to, and I quote, break him as a man, isn't worth a lot of righteous indignation as well. Of course it is. But ultimately, politics is about future orientation, right? That's the game. It's not about 2017 or 2019. It's about 2024 and, you know, pushing forward. And I think that while we dance to the fiddle of David Miliband or Tony Blair or whoever else it is that's very skilled at getting under the skin of the left and getting us to talk in a particular frame, we're going to be signing our own death warrant.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with, like, we don't just want to relitigate 2017, but I think there is a conscious attempt right now for the establishment, from both parties, actually, from the whole media class, to sort of say the only lesson that it's legitimate to learn over the past 5 years is that left-wing politics is always bound to fail. And any other lesson you might try and learn from the last 5 years, you know, whether that is the attempts by the media class to close ranks and attack a left-winger and make strengths like an anti-imperialist politics into a weakness, and the ability of an institution like the Labour Party to make the life of a left-wing leadership hell. You know, all of these, we can't say, no one knows if we would have won without those constraints, but those constraints existed, and to try and erase those from history is, I'm gonna say, Stalinist, because that's what you're supposed to say when you erase history, isn't it?
I mean, look, no, I agree with you there, but I'd augment it just a little bit, which is now we're in this completely strange conversation where there's a lot of revisionism and denial. So now everyone pretends that, you know, in 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader, there were no differences in policy, right? And that there still aren't any differences in policy, especially when it comes to the economic settlement of Corbynism. Everyone is in total denial of not just the nastiness of austerity as a project, but the political culture that went into sustaining it. The idea that Labour was going to be tougher on benefits claimers, the entire culture industry which sprung up around it. And I think that we're still in that stage of denial, this thing of, you know, which the Labour right love to say, which is we're the real socialists, which is obviously completely for the birds. What they want is a return to, you know, overgrown sixth formers playing at being the corporate social responsibility party. But in terms of how they bracket off those left politics, after, you know, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and Diane Abbott really have managed to shift the boundaries of what's considered acceptable to say about how an economy should work. Even if those policies aren't necessarily being implemented, it's certainly shifted the frame of you know, people can't openly demonize benefits claimants in quite the same way. It's having to be this project of tarnishing Corbyn's character as an individual and the morality of anyone who is seen to support him and his brand of politics. And this is done, as you said, by targeting the anti-imperialism element of it, calling anything to do with anti-imperialism, and in particular the politics around Palestine, cranky, anti-Semitic, irrelevant. But also, I think by making us seem like we took what was a phenomenal brand, the Labour brand, and drove it into the ground. There's a complete lack of curiosity about what that 40% result was, where it came from. People like to say it was because Theresa May was so obviously a terrible candidate. While someone else pointed out on Twitter this week, you know, Matthew Goodwin was so convinced that she was going to utterly decimate the Labour Party at the polls that afterwards he had to physically eat a copy of his own book. The level of hubris and confidence in her as a candidate was one of the reasons why, when the snap election was called, I was like, that's it, head for the hills. We're done so. So there's a lot of rewriting of that history, but I think that it's personalized in a really deliberate way to try and bury the last vestige of, you know, moral authority and integrity that Corbynism can lay claim to.
The whole thing of, oh, it was against the worst ever Conservative Party campaign. Well, they got their largest share of the vote since 1987 or 92. There's, in terms of, I'll start again. They did extraordinarily well. They got their best result basically in several decades, by some measures since 87, by some measures since 1992. John Major got a huge number of votes in 1992. And you had, as Ash has already said, you had people like David Goodhart, Jason Cowley, people on the sort of, you know, the muscular centre, the muscular liberals, saying that Theresa May was going to be like Angela Merkel. They were saying she was going to be in the position for 20 years. She was going to be in position for a generation. She, you know, maybe she'll outdo Margaret Thatcher's post-war record. And everybody conveniently forgets this, including David Miliband. That's his opinion. He's more than welcome to his opinion. But it's really, I think it's very difficult to say Theresa May gets a higher percentage of the vote. She gets more votes than David Cameron in 2015 and 2010. Then the Tories get in 2005, 2001, 1997. Very, very difficult argument to make. Well, despite all of that, it's the worst campaign they ever ran. How so, David? Secondly, you said that, you know, he was an apologist for extraordinary rendition. I just want to say, and people forget this about New Labour, Jack Straw wasn't an apologist for extraordinary rendition. He denied it was happening. He denied it was happening. Who was also a foreign secretary during the New Labour years, Jack Straw. And he said that it was a conspiracy theory. And to the best of my recollection, he said that in Parliament. He said it frequently in the papers. This is a conspiracy theory. We now know, of course, it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was happening. Tacitly, we were giving people over to the Americans who would then be subject to torture in some cases and CIA black sites. So was Britain torturing people? There are actually some significant arguments to suggest we were. What we were absolutely doing was kidnapping, because that's actually the correct word for extraordinary rendition. We were kidnapping people, then handing them over to the CIA, knowing that they would be tortured, or handing them over to the Pakistani, you know, security services, knowing that they would be tortured. These are the kinds of people we're talking about. Very few moral scruples. And a final point I want to make is David Miliband's nickname and sort of the New Labour, within the New Labour apparatus, was Brains. You know, he was one of the major people to write the 1997 General Election Manifesto. He was the top guy at IPPR, Institute for Public Policy Research. It was, you know, the preeminent New Labour think tank. And yet, despite this fine intellectual pedigree, although I find it very, very strange she went to Oxford on 3 Bs and a D, that's for another day. I think somebody probably pushed his candidacy forward. Doesn't often happen for working class kids, often does happen for people whose parents are esteemed left academics or celebrities. Think Toby Young and Michael Young. Think David Miliband and Ralph Miliband. That's a separate point. Despite this fine intellectual pedigree, has he made a point about policy since 2015, since his exit from politics? He's only spoken about Jeremy Corbyn. You know, he's only spoken about how terrible and nasty and stupid the Brexiteers are. You know, what's he got to offer? What has his politics got to offer? Because let's be real, if there is a sort of an intellectual powerhouse behind this third way politics in the UK today, he's based in the US, but obviously he keeps on making these rare interventions, then it's somebody like a David Miliband. And yet he hasn't really got anything to say about the social care crisis, or demographic aging, or climate change, or rising inequality, or the housing crisis, or electoral reform, or the potential breakup of the union. He hasn't got anything to say about these vital areas for our national conversation, yet he's all too happy to interject when it comes to the internal machinations of the Labour Party. What this tells us is actually that David Miliband and these alleged powerhouses behind continuity New Labour don't really have that much to offer in terms of policy, don't have that much to offer in terms of analysis. It's a very vacuous, insipid, fatuous politics. And the problem for them is when they aren't against something, be it Brexit or be it Jeremy Corbyn, one has to wonder what they're for. I suspect it's not very much.
We're going to go to a comment. Sal Staniforth tweets on the hashtag Tisky Sour. Watching Tisky Sour and Michael J.S. Walker is spot on. One of the main lessons from 2017 is twofold, that you can get 40% with a left-wing economic program, and people like David Miliband are desperate to bury that lesson deep. We shouldn't let him, so let's learn it. I agree. Well, you agree with me. I agree with you agreeing with me. It makes sense, I suppose. We're going to go on to our next story. But first of all, actually, and this is important, if this is the first time watching your show and you're enjoying it, hit the subscribe button and hit the notifications bell as well, which means you will be informed every time we go live. Our regular viewers will know that is every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Our final story for the evening. On Friday's show, we spoke about the conveyor belt that transports migrant bashing from Nigel Farage's Twitter feed to our Tory government via right-wing talk show hosts and tabloid front pages. The BBC have now got in on this dehumanising act. So on BBC Breakfast this morning, that took the form of live commentary of an overcrowded boat carrying people seeking asylum to Dover. Let's take a look.
Yeah, and you can see why it's dangerous today, because the sea is pretty choppy. And then we came across this boat around half an hour ago, just spotted it on the horizon, and we have seen them actually trying to get water out the boat. They're doing that at the moment. They're using a plastic container just to try to bail out the boat. So obviously it's pretty overloaded there. People are wearing life jackets, but it is pretty dangerous, just the number of people on board that boat. Let me just see. Are you okay? Are you all right? You okay? Okay. Where are you from? Syria. And how many people? How many? So they say they're from Syria. They say they're okay. I can see there are some women on board that boat as well. Majority men. Where are you going? Where do you want to go? Their destination is Dover, obviously. So at the moment they're motoring through the channel. At the moment the boat seems to be safe. The engine seems to be going. When we were out on the channel on Friday, the boat we were following actually got very close to the White Cliffs before it actually broke down. The engine broke down. But at the moment, pretty choppy out there. They are bailing the boat out from time to time, but they seem to be safe at the moment. But obviously the Coast Guard has been alerted and they will be on their way. But this is a sight that is becoming increasingly common in the channel. We heard from the Coast Guard that a boat had set out early this morning, but no one was quite sure where it was. But then shipping was asked to look out for it, and then suddenly we spotted it. Often you can spot them from the life jackets, from the colour of the life jackets makes it clear in the distance. But certainly at the moment, this boat heading towards Dover, and so we'll shadow it and just see how the situation develops.
Now, what an extraordinarily dystopian piece of television. So he's not there giving any context as to why these people might be risking their lives crossing the channel. There's no story about the fact that these people could well be fleeing war and persecution. It's just treated, it's kind of half nature program, half sports event. And it's just such an odd, dehumanizing form of journalism. Why is this even a live news story? I mean, I can imagine this being an interesting feature, but the idea that we should be doing live coverage of a few hundred people seeking a better life, desperate people seeking asylum, for us to cover that like a sports event, I think is, you know, especially from our public broadcaster, just inhuman. Ash.
I mean, you had it bang on the money when you said that this was dehumanizing coverage of desperate people in dangerous waters on a dinghy where they're having to bail out water with a plastic bucket. There's a real risk to their lives here. And this BBC journalist is covering it in a completely content and context-free way. And I think you've got to look at where that comes from. Because while Nigel Farage having a direct conveyor belt through right-wing media outlets, through to the BBC and through right-wing talk show hosts, right to the Conservative Party, is a contemporary thing, the breathlessness of this kind of coverage and its orchestration isn't new at all. So when David Blunkett was Home Secretary, you might remember, I mean, this was when I was quite young, but I remember it very well, there became this public obsession with bogus asylum seekers. And this was in a way where you thought that at first it was an opposition between the New Labour government and the right-wing papers, in particular, at the time it was The Sun and the News of the World. There was a kind of increase, a flurry of activity. The coverage was heating up from these right-wing tabloids. And then you had David Blunkett writing an editorial in one of these papers vowing a New Labour crackdown. And then it transpired that all of this was coordinated. It was an opportunity for New Labour to look like it was being tough on asylum seekers. And this became a real obsession in that second Blair ministry. You had successful asylum applications halving, and at the same time you had temporary working visas, which turns potential refugees into precarious workers. You had that kind of visa doubling. So this is a development and an intensification of a media phenomenon which has much longer origins, except now with social media, it's fairly easy for a very media savvy political figure like Nigel Farage to just hack into it right away. And I'm afraid that journalists lack either the will, the curiosity, or perhaps, dare I say it, the professional skill to reframe it and to serve their audience well. So even when you have journalists and broadcasters who aren't necessarily hostile to the humanity of migrants, they still feel the need to pose questions to them in ways which I think are gravely insulting to their humanity. I was half listening to Good Morning Britain this morning, and Adil Ray, who I genuinely think isn't a hostile interlocutor, was putting a question to Hassan Akkad, who's a Syrian refugee who made the crossing via Turkey and the Calais jungle, flew into Heathrow on a forged passport, who filmed his whole journey, said, well, there's this feeling out there that asylum seekers are just here for benefits. And while Hassan Akkad, because he's a very skilled orator, was able to rebuff that question, the very framing of it, the legitimizing of this feeling as though it is of equal value to facts, is a very worrying thing. And it can't just be left up to individual refugees who have been able to, meet the standards of sainthood necessary to be considered a human being to rebut some of these ideas. These are things which have to come from the media. And the last thing, because I know I've been rambling on for a bit, that I want to say is that it's very worrying that broadcasters have adopted the language of illegal immigrants whenever they see these rubber dinghies of boats. Because strictly speaking, that's not true. You don't have to claim asylum in the first safe country that you reach, even if you are one of the minority of refugees who comes to Europe. 85% of refugees are hosted by countries which neighbour their home country. But you don't have to claim asylum in the first safe place that you see. And if you reach the shores of this country and you claim asylum, you are not an illegal immigrant by definition. You are an asylum seeker until your case is processed. And so what's really worrying to me is that this dehumanizing language of illegal immigrant, and sometimes just migrant, used in a way which has got this kind of venom to it, is taking that work which was put in by this unholy alliance between New Labour and the right-wing tabloids of scaremongering around bogus asylum seekers, and it's using these images of desperate people who've been dehumanized, demonized as criminal and dirty, to then also delegitimize immigration as a whole.
I mean, I think it's quite important to be specific. I'm going to go to Aaron in one moment, but what I think was wrong with that video, because I think there might be some people who watch that and say, well, he was reasonably polite, and obviously it's legitimate to film people, doing what is I suppose, interesting, worrying activity, however you want to frame it. But if that was done in a sensitive way with context, maybe that would have been fine. But to do it as live coverage, as if it is a sporting event, I do think is very distasteful. I suppose one last thing I'd say is that, I saw a lot of people saying, why don't they just let them on the boat? I'm not actually sure that is the best critique of it, because I think, I don't even know what the law is on that. But I think the idea that as a journalist, if you keep out of it as much as possible until you have no choice, I'm sure if it capsized, right, they wouldn't just film them drowning. So I wasn't that convinced by the idea of don't let them on the boat, but I just thought it was a piece of footage which was incredibly dehumanizing.
It was the breathlessness, right? I mean, I was watching it and I felt like I was watching, the OJ car chase.
Exactly.
So it was a spectacle. It was just pure spectacle. And the humanity of the people involved was, I think that the broadcaster didn't really know what to do with it. So he kind of, in effect, is like, are you okay? They say they're okay. And so what that indicates to me is that he doesn't have the ability to, within that context, provide better coverage that his audience so sorely deserves.
Aaron?
Yeah, no, I thought that the live aspect was terrible. I think it makes for terrible journalism. I think it's deeply unprofessional. I think it's deeply unethical. Why have they done it? Because it will probably get the most traffic, and it's very cheap. You know, tomorrow we're going to send out a small crew of 3 people. You know, a director of production, the presenter, and the cameraman. You're going to go out on a boat, and you're going to record some people, and it will go out live. And like you say, what would have been far better is a feature, speak to people consensually. There's also, by the way, there's a big question about the journalistic ethics of this. Just recording people who are very vulnerable. It's like recording somebody who's just been assaulted on the street or robbed without their consent. You know, I think it's a deeply. I actually probably think it's probably against the BBC's own general conventions on journalistic ethics. I'm very surprised it was done actually. Similar in some ways to the live streaming of the Cliff Richard housebreaking. The only difference being by the police a few years ago. The only difference being, of course, these people are powerless and won't have the ability to get a lawyer and to sue potentially. But it does tell you a great deal about the more problematic areas of our country's journalistic life. And like you said, it's the BBC. This should be public service broadcast. This should be precisely the place where you can get informed, context-driven feature writing, feature broadcast. Hasn't happened. And so I think, I think it was something of an nadir. You know, it was very close to reality TV. It was incredibly close. And this is not the first time we're seeing it at the BBC. We saw it even often with the coverage of the Labour Party. You know, it looked like one of these kind of telenovelas from Latin America. Laura Kuenssberg thought she was actually one of the protagonists within the story. You know, this reality TV show like Big Brother. You know, one day ding dong between this person and Jeremy Corbyn, this person and Jeremy Corbyn. That isn't journalism, and nor is this. And then finally, I wonder what's the best, and I think it's something for our audience as well. What's the best way for left-wing media, left-wing journalists to deal with this? Because I don't think we would want to do that. I don't think we would want to live stream that. To me, that was kind of like one rung below Jeremy Kyle. I mean, you could have done the exact same thing with Jeremy Kyle there. Nobody thinks Jeremy Kyle is a journalist, right? He was a reality TV provocateur shouting at people, and it would be the same thing. And
can I chime in really quickly? Is that I think one of the problems is that we've got a media culture which rewards right-wing stupidity. Now, I've got no idea how India Willoughby identifies her own politics. It might be the case that, I don't know, she's a long-time reader of the Morning Star. That's not what I mean when I'm talking about right-wing stupidity. I'm talking about things which fit into a right-wing frame, which views, migration by desperate people as inherently illegitimate, as threatening, and something which has to be guarded against, almost like you would, bacteria, a virus, something dirty and something wrong. And it's something which is, I think, really quite deep in bits of the nation's psyche. And I think that you have no better finger on, the clogged artery of Middle England than when you watch morning television. On the Jeremy Vine show this morning, there were callers calling in saying the country is full. When I was on Question Time once, a woman said, the country is sinking. We're overcrowded. We can't fit anymore. Now, Glasgow is a city built for 1 million. It's currently got 600,000. You've got demographic aging. You've got a low productivity economy. You've also got a lot of land you could build more housing on, and you also have a lot of empty properties, which are just investment portfolios for the very wealthy in London. Yeah. It's absolutely not true that we don't have the room. We don't have the physical room. But this level of complete meat-headedness has been validated by a media culture which says that your feeling of being threatened or swamped by scary migrants is as legitimate as a discussion of Britain's international obligations, the real facts about the movement of people, the fact that actually Britain isn't seeing the majority of asylum applications made to European countries. We have, about 30,000 fewer than Greece even, and that's not even get started on France and Germany, that we don't have a particularly generous benefit system. You have 44,000 asylum seekers living on £5 a day. You try building a life on £5 a day. You've got a media culture which says, yes, madam, I know that you've got a sirloin steak where your brain should be, but that doesn't mean that you can't weigh in on this discussion about what to do with deeply traumatized and vulnerable people as though you are an expert. And I think that's something that's wrong. I think that's something that's really wrong. The devaluing of first-hand knowledge of what it's like to work in this sector and what it's like to be an asylum seeker as well.
You know, I mean, I don't want to obsess about the numbers thing, because even if there were 500,000 people trying to cross the channel, I still think saying that we're going to put up barbed wire so they sink would be, you know, disgraceful. But I think the fact that we are pushed to a point where people are openly saying on morning television that what we should do is intentionally drown people who are coming to this country to seek asylum, you know, kill them, essentially. We've been driven to that because 4,000 people have crossed the channel. Now, that's like 2 secondary schools. You know, we're a country of 60 million people. People that could fill 2 secondary schools have come over, and that is such a challenge to our identity and British civilization that it has become acceptable to talk about intentionally killing people. Like, how low is the threshold to drive us into, you know, basically the language of fascism?
I mean, I do think that it's useful, not always, to perhaps take a little sidestep out of our usual, you know, Marxist materialist analysis and have a think about how political cultures are inculcated, what the mood is, what the emotional affect is. And I think a really core part of reactionary Englishness is both this bellicose sense of one's own strength and prowess, 2 world wars and 1 World Cup, and an absolutely, you know, immobilizing paranoia that someone might want to share illegitimately in the riches of this country. It's, you know, like a crazed miser is the kind of, you know, mindset which I think a lot of these, you know, narratives are speaking to. And I think, you know what, I don't have anything more articulate to say than I think it's bizarre. I think sometimes we're a really weird country. This is us being really weird.
Can I say, I think there is a deep conflict within British exceptionalism, which increasingly actually is an English phenomenon. And, you know, on the one hand, we're talking about an empire. The British Empire in 1913 accounted for about 36% of global GDP. A third of the world economy was basically the British Empire. Today, the UK accounts for about 2% of global GDP. So that kind of shows you the difference between self-perception and reality. But at the same time, you've got this huge empire, a third of global GDP in 1913. But also you have simultaneously the idea of the plucky underdog. You know, and which one is it? And you see it played out here, right? On the one hand, you've got Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers going, this is the best country in the world. It's a country of opportunity. Anybody can make it if they try. And then these people are coming over here because they're listening to you. They're taking you at their word, at your word. And of course, when they come over here, they're coming over here because they think it's a place of opportunity and they can make a good life for themselves, given their very difficult start, war zones, places subject to famine, etc., potentially genocide. They're just listening to you, Boris, or Toby Young, or, you know, Tim Montgomery. They believe you. They believe the hype. They come here and they, how dare you? We're full up. We've got no money. This is outrageous. Something for nothing. But it really does go to the very sort of the very heart of British exceptionalism, which at the same time wants to say we're not so exceptional at all. We're so, you know, which America doesn't have, by the way. You know, America still articulates its nationalism as this Promethean exceptionalism. Britain does that, but at the same time, like you say, Ash, the adjunct is like, oh God, maybe, you know, we're a complete fraud. We've been found out. We've got nothing. We're full up. We're penniless. Very interesting.
It's taking Tim Montgomery at his word. He says Britain is the most tolerant, the least racist country, but if you try and come here, we'll drown you. Yeah,
it's crazy. I mean, there's no other word for it. I mean, how else would you like to describe this? As complete, you know, a bifurcation of rationality.
We're going to go to some comments and finish. Ricochet tweets on the hashtag Tisky Sour. I look forward to people at the BBC following Goldman Sachs executives in such a manner for morning viewers to see. Martha Rose tweets, listening in live for the first time, but been a keen fan since beginning of lockdown. Just got Twitter so I could tell you to keep up the good work. Oh, thank you, Martha Rose. Very kind. And solidarity with Dawn Butler. We support you. We support you too, Dawn. Richard Mischuk with a £10 super chat. Great show. I posted a couple of tweets supporting Dawn today, and the backlash blew me away. And I'm a nobody. BLM movement has a long way to go. Because you're not a nobody, Richard Mischuk. Hope I pronounced your name right. And Jack Greenwood with a $4.99 super chat. Revisiting your video with Michael Brooks after his tragic passing. Are there any other US political commentators you admire, want to work with? Obviously, we've got all of our friends at Jacobin, TYT, the Young Turks. Actually, you know what's really good at the moment is Glenn Greenwald's. I can't remember what he's called it, but their Intercept podcast on YouTube. Very good. We are going to wrap up tonight, and there's plenty more, obviously. I don't want to leave out anyone. We're going to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats tonight. Thank you for watching as ever. If you want to support us directly, do please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. We'll be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. So make sure to hit subscribe and not miss that. You've been watching Tisky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.